Hello and welcome once again to my Christmas craft counter. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel typically sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is not one of mine. It is a recipe, actually two recipes, but what we're going to be making today are dough ornaments. I'm going to start with a salt dough ornament, then we're going to move on to cinnamon ornaments. Now these you can let air dry for a few days, like up to 5 days or so, or you can do as I'm doing. I have my oven preheated to 200 degrees, and you can put each of these in there for 2 to 3 hours until they've dried out. And I did notice that the cinnamon ornaments tend to dry out a bit quicker than the salt dough ornaments. So those I was good at about 2 hours. Salt dough, you might want to go up to 3. But first, let us go over the ingredients. I just have here 2 cups of flour. I'm using bread flour because I had a lot of bread flour left over. Typically it's all purpose, but any flour should do. I have a half a cup of table salt. Make sure it's table salt and not kosher salt. And then I have here a cup of warm water. I'm probably only gonna need about 3/4 of a cup, but I always like to have a little bit extra just in case, because flour can have difficulty absorbing the liquids depending on the atmosphere in the room. So if it's too dry, it might take more. If it's too moist, it might take less. So I'm gonna start at about a half a cup, and then probably need about 3/4 of a cup. But all we need to do is take our salt and whisk it into our flour. I wondered why we needed the salt if you already have flour, because you're kind of making a dough anyway with the flour. And what I discovered is that the salt is actually in there to help preserve these ornaments. Because if you just had the flour, after a while they might start to get mold or things like that. But with the salt is a preservative, and that is going to help us keep these lasting longer. There are other steps we'll take later as well, but that's just in there to help us preserve this. Now the water is warm because the warm water will absorb into the flour better than cold water will. You don't want it hot, but you do want it warm. So let me start off at about a half a cup or so and see how that does. And you're just going to mix that together with a spatula, spoon, what have you. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna need more water here. So let me add a bit more. And you just want this to come together. You may, after a while, it may become too firm to use the spoon or spatula. So you may have to get in there with your hands. Now I am pressing down on the dough to get some of that flour that is not being absorbed, rather than adding more water. Right now the dough is kind of moist, so I want to see if I need to add more water. And yeah, I definitely need more water. Okay, now I'm going to get in there with my hands for a moment. And once you get your hands in there, you can mush things together more than just with the spatula. And I'm going to basically be kneading this so that I can get all that moisture distributed. And I don't think I will need any more water from the feel of it. And just gonna pick that up. It's almost like Play-Doh, but this is a great thing to do with the kids. And this is also, if you've ever seen those little handprint ornaments or footprint ornaments or even paw ornaments, this is how they make those, is making a salt dough and then putting an impression into it. But I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, this looks pretty good. Clean this up, put a little flour on the counter, and we'll move on. Okay, so I have my counter floured. I'm also going to flour my rolling pin. I have this silicone rolling pin that you would think things don't stick to, but things stick to it all the time, so don't ask me. Just gonna roll this out to about a 1/4 inch thickness. And you can easily double, triple this recipe. You can even cut it in half if you don't want to make too many ornaments. Okay, so that's about 1/4 inch. That looks good. So now I have my cookie cutters over here. I also have a straw. What this straw is going to do is allow me to make holes for the hanger so that I don't have to try worrying about making a hole later. And you can do different sizes. You could do just round circles if you wanted to write somebody's name in here, but I'm just going to cut them just like you would a cookie. Set that aside for now. I'm gonna do a little variety here. Christmas tree, candy cane, and a bell. And so I'm just gonna cut these out and then we will move on. Okay, so I'm rolling out the last scrap of the dough and I'm going to use a round cookie cutter. I'm gonna cut that out, get rid of this excess dough. You could, if you wanted, make a little creature, a little whatever with this. Let that dry out as well, but I'm just gonna scrap that. If you wanted to make a handprint, paw print, take the child's hand, the dog's paw, and just press it in pretty deeply so that you get the impression, and then that will bake right in there. Later, we can paint these, we can put glitter, we should seal them with a little Mod Podge or a little spray sealant, but I'm not gonna continue with this impression of my 3 fingers. I was just showing you how you could do a paw print, footprint, handprint, what have you. All right, let me clean this up and I will move on to making our little holes. All right, so we have our ornaments cut out. Now we're going to put a hole at the top, but you don't want to put it too close to the very top because that will make that piece of the ornament more fragile. And when you go to tie in a hanger, it may break off. So you want to go a little further down than from the very top. And just use a straw, press in, give it a little twist, and pull it out. You don't have to worry about removing the dough from the straw. Each time you push, it'll just push it further up the straw. So just make holes for hangers for each of your ornaments. If you want, you can also write initials into these. You could write words. You can use stamps to impress words into this or letters. So you have a lot of ways you can play around with this dough. So you just want to finish putting your holes in all of these ornaments. And then I'm going to put them into the oven and let them start baking because the cinnamon, as I said, do take a little less time. So I know these will take longer, so I'm going to start those off. I'm going to make sure I check these after an hour just to see where they are. I think they're going to need probably at least 3, but I'm going to get these done and I'll be back. All right, so for the cinnamon dough ornaments, I have 1 cup of ground cinnamon and I have 3/4 cup of unsweetened applesauce. I don't think it has to be unsweetened, but that's what I had on hand. And I have my container of cinnamon over here just so I can dust a little bit on the counter as I roll it out, right? You don't want flour that's gonna cause white spots. Now I've seen some recipes that also include adding craft glue. Now that is a possibility. But the problem for me, it does create a smoother texture on the dough. And just using these 2 ingredients will give it more of a rustic look, a little more textured. But I'd rather have the textured look because when I made it with the glue, I could barely smell any of the cinnamon. When I'd smell it, all I could smell was glue. So I'm doing without the glue, but there are recipes out there with the glue, or you can just swap out a little of the applesauce for the glue if you want something a little smoother. But honestly, I like the rustic look of just these 2 ingredients, and you definitely get more of a cinnamon smell. If you wanted to make more of a spiced dough, you could add like a little bit of ginger, some cloves, make it a little more scented if you want. I'm not doing that. And I'm also, as with the other dough, I'm not gonna add all of this applesauce in at once. I'm gonna add most of it and then stir and see if I really need the entire thing. Now you do want to be careful with the cinnamon because it will puff up a lot if you stir it too vigorously right away. See, I just stirred it gently. Now it's getting more damp, so I'm going to press it down and smooth that around. And it is looking a smidge dry, so I'm going to add in the rest of my applesauce and get this all incorporated. Just like we did before, I'll probably switch over to my hands once I get this mostly combined. Get my hands in here and get this mixed together. Now I've seen where some recipes suggest that you let this sit so that the applesauce can absorb more into the dough and become a little smoother, but I don't really think that's necessary. I'm definitely going to smell more fragrant after this, that's for sure. If you're like, oh, I don't want to waste a whole cup of cinnamon on these ornaments, there are some very cheap ones. This one I got from Amazon. I think this entire container was about $8. But I've also seen some in the store. I think it's Badia or Badia, however they pronounce it. Usually in the Spanish section. They have some very inexpensive spices, so that might be a good place to get your cinnamon for this. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm gonna clean myself up and we're gonna move on. I'm just going to dust a little bit of cinnamon over my work surface just so that we don't get any sticking. I'm also going to dust my rolling pin with a little bit of cinnamon as well. Now we're going to take this out, pat that down a bit, and then roll. You can see that there are little cracks here in our dough, which I think is fine. It gives it that rustic look I was talking about. But if you didn't want that, you could let this sit for about an hour just to let everything absorb, and that might smooth out a little bit. Or as I said, you could try the glue, but I want these definitely scented like cinnamon. All right, so I brought in my baking sheet. I'm just going to, just like we did with the salt dough, cut these out and place them onto our baking sheet here. Gonna do a couple of hearts, a bell, candy cane. So you can do whatever you want with these, whatever shapes you want, but just have fun with it and create whatever kind of decorations you want. So let me get these finished up and then we will move on. All right, and I do have a little scrap of dough left. I was thinking I could roll this out into a log and turn it into a candy cane. And you want it to be a fairly even thickness all throughout. Bend that, shape it. I'm gonna put this right down here and bring in my tray. Again, I'm gonna take my straw and I'm going to just make the holes. Again, you don't want to get too close to the top when you're making these holes. And you want to try to stay as centered as possible, which isn't always easy for my unsteady hands, so, oops. Now see, I got too close up here and I did exactly what I said not to do. Squeeze out this dough and fill that hole back in and then make it a little bit lower. All right, so we've got the holes made in our ornaments. We have our little scrap candy cane here to see how that turns out. These are gonna go in the oven for about 2 hours. I'll probably check them about an hour and a half just to see where they are, but it usually takes about 2 hours. You just want them very dried out so that they will hold on to their shape. So these are going in for 2 hours. The other ones have already been in for probably about 20 minutes or so. So I will be back when they are done. Okay, so there you have them, my dough ornaments. I have my cinnamon dough ornaments here and my salt dough ornaments over here. I did play around and paint a little and put a little glitter on a couple. Or you can just leave them plain like this. They have a nice, like this one definitely has a nice rustic look and definitely smell that cinnamon, which as I said would have been diluted by the glue. But if you want to use the glue, go right ahead. Even the candy cane that I shaped came out fairly well. But that's all there is to it. Now, as I expected, the cinnamon ornaments only took about 2 hours. The salt dough ornaments I had in the oven for about 3 hours, then turned it off and left them in there for a little bit, then put them out on a cooling rack so that they can dry. They are still a little soft on the underside, but once they've been out in the air for a little bit, that will dry right up and it will be a solid piece. The cinnamon ornaments are definitely dried. I hope that you enjoyed this little tutorial for making some ornaments, something you can do with the kids. and have for years. Just don't forget to seal it so that you can preserve it as long as possible. Mod Podge, polyurethane. I usually use this craft sealant spray, acrylic spray, but I hope that you will give this a try. I will write up the recipes, even though they're not really recipes, and list them down in the description box so that you have more detail about how to create these so you don't have to rely on your memory. I know if it were my memory, I'd get nothing done. Also in the description box, you'll find links to my Amazon storefront, my Built Bar rewards, Fetch rewards, my Skinny Syrups code, and my social media, both my Instagram and 2 Facebook groups that I'm part of. So go check out the description box for all sorts of information. But if you enjoyed this, I hope that you will do the usual, like, subscribe, comment, share, and hit the notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video, such as this one, which is not one of my normal videos. It is a recipe, but it's not edible. So I think I'm gonna go get some strings through these holes and get them ready to hang on the tree. So until next time, bye.